Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. So I've got some interesting stories that I definitely want to wind up covering today. One is probably a very good explanation of why more quote-unquote good cops don't stand up against the quote-unquote bad cops. I also have a story from Reuters about a Supreme Court hearing that is going to be happening on Wednesday. And yes, that's the same day as the Ask Me Anything, so you can send those questions. If you have not already done so, you can send those via email to ama@fppradio.com. I'll be getting the threads up on Facebook and Twitter a little bit later today. You can also, comment on those if you're following the Facebook, the Twitter, or I also put it up on Sue. Not that I really do a lot of stuff on Sue, but I know a few people that are on there, and it's an interesting concept that Sue. It's spelled TSU. It's a new social network sort of thing, but in some kind of ways, it's like a multi-level marketing thing. So, I'm not really big into it, but I'll post on there occasionally, and I think I've, racked up $2. Ooh, wow, $2 whole dollars for just posting stuff on social media. And, whatever, it's a thing. I don't really know. I don't expect to ever get rich on it. That's why I don't really spend a lot of time on there. But, I'll post stuff on there, and sometimes people comment. And, so it's there. So let me begin with something that is rather hilarious, if you will, or at least I think it's hilarious. There has been, for the last several presidential election cycles, Jesse Ventura has been floating around the idea of, I might run. And, well, he was asked something on Twitter a couple of days ago about would he run, and his response, if I do, it won't be until June of 2016 because we got to get the pikers out first. And I don't know what a piker is. And then he says, maybe, never, I don't know. The soonest I can run is 2016. After that, I probably would not do it. And the response here was basically his answer to whether or not he would seek the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2016. He says that he will not decide until June of 2016. Well, there's a problem with that. And the problem with that is that the Libertarian Party convention is in May of 2016. So I do think that it would be funny if Jesse Ventura announces a month after the convention where the Libertarian Party will choose its presidential candidate. That would be hilarious. Well, no, they've already kind of chosen their guy, Jesse, and he's like, but now I want to run for it. No, sorry, it's too late. So either he doesn't know when the Libertarian Party convention is, or he doesn't care, and he thinks that somehow, whomever is the nominee of the Libertarian Party will just step aside and say, okay, here you go, Jesse. But then that's going to wind up screwing up a bunch of petitions because they'll already have started petitioning for whoever gets the nomination. And then they'll have to restart for Jesse Ventura. I don't think it's ever going to happen. And I think Jesse Ventura knows that it's never going to happen. And I think that Donald Trump is never going to wind up running either. And these are just two guys that they kind of make a name by every couple of years throwing out, I might run for president. And it really just sort of keeps them in the limelight. So now let's go from things that will never happen to things that should happen more. No, not the death penalty. That should also never happen. I'll talk about that a little later in the show. That's the Supreme Court hearing that's coming up on Wednesday, and it's actually not about whether or not the death penalty will continue. I'll tell you about it. But first, the story here from the Free Thought Project explains a little bit about why more good cops don't do anything about the bad cops. The story out of Atlanta, Georgia, says, in yet another tragic incident of retaliation against officers who try to police their own, police officer Sharon Walters is now fighting an uphill legal battle to prove her case. In 2011, Walters and fellow officers were working on a crime bust on a chop shop. Walters said she saw her teammates stealing during the bust. She told Channel 2's Rachel Stockman, quote, I'm trained to recognize crime. I know what I recognized that day they asked me about it. I spoke up about it. Walters was a 16-year veteran officer of the Atlanta Police Department, said she witnessed cops stealing from a truck. Quote, they asked me specifically, who did you see take items? And I had to tell them who I saw take the lights. After reporting the incident to her superiors, Walters claims that she is now being retaliated against. When you see people mugging you, they are not talking to you because you are the snitch. You are going to tell. According to WSB-TV, Walters said she'd been transferred 4 times since reporting the allegation and is now off the streets on a desk job, filing open records request. According to an open records request, several officers involved in the bust were given written reprimands for failing to ensure evidence was properly documented and turned into property. This says secaton. I don't know if that's supposed to be another word or not. The report does not mention the thefts directly. In a summary judgment, Fulton County Superior Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams wrote, the court finds that plaintiff's testimony failed to establish the essential elements of a retaliation claim. The article here from the Free Thought Project continues. It says the system is set up to protect itself. This makes it nearly impossible for an individual whistleblower to prove wrongdoing. Despite these challenges, Walter and her legal team are continuing their struggle through the system. And yes, it is a struggle through the system because, again, as it says, the system is set up to protect itself. The good cops don't remain cops very long because the system is set up to make sure that the good cops don't stay around. And I'm not just saying this because this is what I think. I'm saying this because this is what I know. I've talked a little bit about it in the past. I was a corrections officer for about a year, and I wanted to be one of the good ones. The worst part about being a corrections officer was not the inmates that I had to deal with. It was the other guards that I had to deal with. When we come back, we'll finish this story and then talk about the Oklahoma death penalty case before the Supreme Court. This is Peace, Love, at Liberty Radio.
Hey, this is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends radio show. I've been working with computer programmer Derek Slopey to create Fiend Phone. I'm using Fiend Phone right now to talk with and record one of my co-hosts in real time. Take it, Davi.
Hey, this is Davi Barker, and I'm 1,000 miles away from Michael, but we sound like we're in the same room.
We sure do, Davi. So, Davi, please tell the nice people more about Fiend Phone.
Fiend Phone is free, open-source software that opens up a global world of possibilities for collaborative, high-quality remote voice media production, and I'm digging it.
People can try the Windows beta version of Fiend Phone right now at fiendphone.com. But we're also raising money to vastly improve Fiend Phone and vastly improve independent talk media worldwide.
So go to fiendphone.com to help out. Who will build the audio roads? We will, with your help.
That's fiendphone.com. FEENPHONE.com. Foxtrot, Echo, November, phone.com.
Fiend Phone. I never knew remote audio could be this good.
Bitcoin Not Bombs is a launching pad for nonprofits and social entrepreneurs into the financial freedom of the Bitcoin economy. Bitcoin Not Bombs offers premium publicity campaigns designed to facilitate an organization's adoption of Bitcoin as a payment system. Bitcoin Not Bombs is fully committed to being the hub of the nonprofit sector of the Bitcoin economy, maximizing the potential cross-promotion of all our clients and commercial partners. To learn more, visit bitcoinnotbombs.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. The story here from the Free Thought Project continues with a quote from one of the attorneys of Miss Sharon Walters. The attorney is named Jennifer Wright, and she says, "We are really going to have to fight our way through the legal system. We have good officers out there, officers that want to do a good job, and we need the courts to support that." And the Free Thought Project here editorializes, and that's fine because they do a good job. Crossing the blue line often means career suicide and can also be dangerous. In January, the Free Thought Project reported on the whistleblower from the Chicago Police Department whose very lives were threatened for trying to expose the corruption in their department. The cycle of the blue line of protection can only persist so long before there is no one left with enough courage to call out the corruption. As Shannon Spalding, one of the whistleblowers from the Chicago Police Department, points out, the blue code of silence and punishment is already an unfortunate reality for most, saying, quote, "It's no secret that if you go against the code of silence and you report corruption, it will ruin your career." And that, in a nutshell, that quote from Shannon Spalding, a whistleblower from the Chicago Police Department, is basically the reason that more cops don't say anything about the bad cops. Let me read this one more time. "It is no secret that if you go against the code of silence and you report corruption, it will ruin your career." So there you have it. That is why there aren't more quote-unquote good cops doing anything about the quote-unquote few bad apples. And just remember the full saying, a few bad apples spoils the bunch. It doesn't say a few bad apples can be pulled out of the bunch and then the bunch is still good. No, a few bad apples spoils the bunch. And that's what's happening is you've got one or two good apples trying to do something about the bad apples that were spoiled. The entire bunch that was spoiled because of a few bad apples, and then the good apples get thrown out of the barrel. So what is going on? Let's jump quickly to the U.S. Supreme Court and this court case with Oklahoma. Well, you may remember about a year ago there was the story about Clayton Lockett, who was being executed for a murder from a good many years ago. You know, it wasn't one of these things of he killed somebody 5 years ago and he's being punished. It was like 20 years ago. And they put the IV in, and they were using a new drug combination because the supplier of one of the main drugs for lethal injection is out of Europe. And they have decided that they are no longer going to fulfill orders to the United States or anywhere in the world for that matter if the drug is to be used for lethal injection. Now, there is an actual medical use for this particular drug. I forget the name of it, but this particular drug that can no longer basically be purchased in the U.S. because there's only one supplier, or there's a handful of suppliers, but they're all in Europe. The drug actually has a medicinal use as an anesthetic, but they can't get that anymore, so they're trying various combinations. And what happened was Clayton Lockett got this new experimental combination of drugs, and it was a combination of that and the IV line not being placed properly. And he sat, or actually laid on the deathbed, convulsing for, I believe it was upwards of an hour before he finally died of a heart attack. Not from the lethal injection. He died of a heart attack. And there have been several cases saying, hey, wait a second, like, this is cruel and unusual, this form of execution. You need to do something about it. And, well, finally, and I'm surprised that it's been so quick. But after a year, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear arguments this week on whether a drug used in Oklahoma's lethal injection mix should be banned in a case that comes as a shortage of execution chemicals has sent some states scrambling for alternatives. The story here from Reuters. The main question before the 9 judges in the case being brought by 3 death row inmates that will be heard Wednesday is whether the use of the sedative midazolam violates constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The case does not address the constitutionality of the death penalty in general, but does bring fresh attention to the debate over whether executions should continue in the United States. Opponents say midazolam is not approved for use in painful surgeries and should not be used in the death chamber because it cannot maintain a coma-like unconsciousness, potentially leaving inmates in intense pain for lethal injection drugs that halt breathing and stop the heart. The drug has been used in executions in Oklahoma, Florida, Ohio, and Arizona. Richard Glossop, John Grant, and Benjamin Cole are the 3 inmates who are filing the suit, or who have had attorneys file the suit on their behalf. And the petition to the court reads in part, Oklahoma's selection of midazolam was grounded in expedience rather than science. Glossop arranged for his employer to be beaten to death. Grant stabbed a correctional worker to death. And Cole killed his 9-month-old daughter. Now, I am in no way trying to say that these men do not deserve some form of punishment. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that the way in which the death penalty, and again, this is me, this is not the article from Reuters. What I am saying is that the manner in which the death penalty is being carried out is cruel and unusual. Because, again, think about it. And I know I've mentioned this previously, but I just feel that I have to reiterate. Because the way the death penalty is being carried out is, it's not immediately after someone is found, like, you know, with the knife in their hand and blood dripping from it and the dead body laying right beneath them, someone saying, you killed them, and the person saying, yes, I did. And then the person that catches them carrying out justice. That is not what happens with state-funded death penalty. What happens with state-funded death penalty is you have a bunch of people who look at evidence, and a lot of times it's flawed evidence, and we know for a fact that there have been innocent people that have been put to death. So you've got these people that look at the evidence and say, that man's guilty. And then 15, 20, 30 or more years later, the person is finally punished. I'll continue this thought when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davy Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, we aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience. Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. ExpressCoin is the best choice for buying Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, and more. ExpressCoin prides themselves on their customer service, so much so that the back end on the website should allow them to be even more focused on your needs. Get your cryptocurrencies with money order, check, wire transfer, or cash deposit. Get started at expresscoin.fppradio.com. That's expresscoin.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. There's an Amazon shopping iframe built into the website, or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So let me rewind just a hair and continue my train of thought. So what I was saying about the manner in which the death penalty is carried out in the United States is you have people that are essentially facing their punishment 15, 20, 30, sometimes even more than 30 years later. And there have been at least 7 cases in the last 7.5 months where people have been on death row for longer than 20 years that have been exonerated of, hey, wait a second, we realized that we were looking at bad evidence. You actually didn't do this thing that you were on death row for. Now imagine had those people been executed. It would then be on 12 jurors and a judge and a prosecutor to hang on their conscience that you were responsible for an innocent man being executed. And I don't know of anybody that would want to have that burden on them. I remember a couple of months ago reading the letter from the prosecutor who was saying, hey, I screwed up. I wish that I could make this right somehow. I almost had an innocent man executed. So you have these punishments that come way after the initial crime. Now, nobody in their right mind would think that someone should be punished 15, 20, 30 or more years later because they stole a car when they were 18 years old. Now, I'm not condoning stealing cars. I'm not condoning murder at all. But if they're, and let me pause real quick to say that if justice is supposed to be swift and the punishment is supposed to fit the crime, then is justice being delivered swiftly 30 years later? And I say no. And I say that that alone makes the death penalty cruel and unusual. Now, let me continue and get back to the article, because this article is not about the actual death penalty. It's about using this drug in lethal injection. So let me continue here. The article continues, the state, that being the state of Oklahoma, maintains that the drug is effective. Oklahoma's lawyers said in court papers that the case was a full-throated attack on the state's ability to implement death sentences. Executions in Oklahoma came under greater scrutiny after the flawed lethal injection a year ago of Clayton Lockett. Citing ethical reasons, drug makers, mostly from Europe, began about 4 years ago banning sales of drugs for use in executions. States were forced to bring new combinations and turn to lightly regulated compounding pharmacies, which can mix chemicals for their execution drugs. Another barrier was set up in March when the largest association of U.S. pharmacists approved a measure at its annual meeting urging members to avoid participating in executions. Robert Dunham, executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center, says the difficulties in obtaining drugs are going to persist whether or not midazolam is found to be constitutional. The data from the Death Penalty Information Center is being used by both sides of the debate. And that is something that it sort of is tangentially related to something that I say repeatedly. Statistics can be used to prove anything. And I say that not because the numbers themselves can be swayed one way or the other, but depending on how you look at the statistic, depending on what question was asked or what method of determining the number was used, you can make a statistic show pretty much anything. And I remember this fairly well when I was asked about during the AMA, about the claim that women earn 77 cents for every dollar that a man earns. So I ran numbers with a mythical company, and depending on how you looked at these numbers, the men and the women either made the same because they were all being paid, and that's, in air quotes there, paid $10 an hour in this mythical thing where I was running numbers, or it could be manipulated to show that the male employees were making like $1 for every 80 cents that the female employees made, because based on averages, men tend to work more overtime, they take fewer sick days, and men also don't take maternity leave. And yes, I realize not every woman takes maternity leave, but based on birth rates and other things, you have 1.26 women out of every 100 that will have a child in a year, which means that you then have 1.26 maternity leaves, which is basically 4 months out of the year that, there's not going to be one female in one of those 100 positions. So, you can manipulate those figures, and I don't really know if it's manipulating the figures. It's just reading them how you want and picking and choosing which ones to look at. It's like some of the surveys that have come out recently where they try to say, like, this is the best state in the country. And the one that ranked Florida number one, they only picked 4 economic factors instead of the 250 economic factors that the Mercatus Center looks at. So, again, is that making statistics show whatever you want? Is that manipulating the statistics, or is it just picking and choosing? It, no matter which way you slice it, it's making the statistics give the result you want. And people do that all the time. Now, while I was reading this article, I had a thought to something from Game of Thrones. And this is not a spoiler at all unless you've never seen the show. And even then, it's not really a spoiler. But in Westeros, there's a saying that the person that makes the judgment must carry out the punishment. And what that really means is if you are the lord of, a certain area and you condemn someone to death, it is your duty to carry out the punishment. How many fewer executions would there be in the United States if it was the judge that had to wind up killing the person that was condemned to death? How many fewer executions would there be if not only was it the judge who carried out the punishment, but it was carried out immediately after the verdict was given and the punishment was then delivered by the judge? And I'm not necessarily saying, bring back the chopping block and use a big long sword or bring back the guillotine, but if the judge had to deliver the punishment and then the judge knew that he was responsible directly, not one of these, well, I just signed the paper and somebody else did it, so therefore I'm not responsible. No, judge, you're responsible. for the dead people that you have condemned to death. This is Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Don't forget, every Wednesday's the Ask Me Anything AMA at fppradio.com.